I'm Kenny, the editor of Mix. A couple quick announcements and a couple thank yous. First of all, thank you to Soundcheck. Many of you were probably here yesterday, but this facility that you're in is brand spanking new. All done within the last 4 months. Tremendous job, and they've been tremendously helpful to us in getting back on their feet and getting Mix Nashville back in town.
Yeah, no.
It's going to be fun. I'd like to thank, there's about 15 young guys running around from the Conservatory of Recording Arts and Sciences who are all Nashville residents now. I'd like to thank them for their help over the last couple days. We have a few of them back there at the board. And certainly we'd like to thank our sponsors. They make this possible. We decided to make it a free event to Nashville residents, and we do that with their support. So if you get a chance today, please go out and about and visit them. Thank them for coming, especially down in Studio D. We have programming going all day for live sound. I think even though most of you are studio rats, you will find that there's a good program going there with sponsored by Yamaha and Meyer Sound. So if you get a chance, later today, 6 o'clock, please stick around. We have a special performance by Like Candy Red, a really fun Nashville act. And the stage is being put together right now. Blackhawk Audio is providing the PA with Meyer equipment. Yamaha is supplying the console. They're going to be doing sound checking in the afternoon. You're all welcome to watch them and hang out in the parking lot. And right at 6 o'clock, we'll be putting on about an hour-long concert program. So please stick around and enjoy it. You won't be disappointed. So let's start Dave 2. Kevin Becca, technical editor of Mix Magazine, responsible for all the programming here today. Take it away, Kevin.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out. We tried this yesterday, and it worked pretty good. Under my name there, you see at Mix Nashville 10. If you're tweeting from your phone, you can tweet a question and include that at the end, that tag at the end, and I'll have it up on the screen here. So we can do it that way, or we have the two mics. You can come up anytime during the discussion if something comes up and you want to pop a question in, so we don't have to wait to the end. We've got a great group of guys up here today. And today we're going to get into specifically plugins, but we're going to talk about a little analog too, just because sometimes the plugin doesn't do what the analog can do and vice versa. There's no denying that plugins offer features such as automation, zero noise floor, and affordability that analog can't really touch, but at the same time, sometimes that, in fact we were just talking about it in the room over there, that EQs tend to sound the same. We'll get into that kind of discussion. I'd like to know from you guys is how many of you use plugins exclusively for processing? Okay. How many use a combination of analog and plugins? So okay, it's pretty even. Interesting. All right. Let me start by introducing the guys. I'm out of order here. Oh, there's your call.
Oh, no, it's not.
Steve's in the middle of a mix, and he's got to be like a doctor with a beeper. Steve's career spans over 20 years, where he's worked with Montgomery Gentry, Keith Urban, Declan McGarry, Blake Shelton, Tim McGraw, and more. And if you were here yesterday, Tony Mora was talking about how instrumental you were in putting his room together. And so Robert Venable works out of his studio in Franklin, where he's worked with Megadeth, INXS, Scott Stapp, Cutlass, Disciple, and Building 429, and he also mixes for television. So he's mixed for Saturday Night Live, Discovery Channel, Lexus, Burger King, Pixar, and other commercial.
Not the man television, right?
So, and then Reed Shippen next, who drives that cool black cab out in the parking lot if you see it. It's works out of his private mix studio, and he's worked with Death Cab for Cutie, Fine Frenzy, Cage, The Elephant, Indy Irie, Mark Broussard, Eric Church, and Robert Randolph. And at the end, Terry Christian, who I've known since the late 80s, I think.
Long time.
Yeah, we both worked together in Los Angeles. Actually, the very first session I ever assisted on in a real studio was with this guy. So we're buddies from way back. Terry moved from Los Angeles in the early 90s, and he's worked with Donna Summer, Amy Grant, Leanne Rimes, Michael O'Mardian, Keith Urban, Christopher Cross, and a whole bunch of people. So What I'd like to start with is just talking about your guys' rigs, because it's so dependent, the processing is so dependent on, you know, the amount of RAM you have, and if it's in Pro Tools or whatever you're working in. Just talk about your platform and the computers you guys use on your rigs. Does Steve want to start, Steve?
My assistant's not here, so I don't, oh. No, I have an old G5 with, I think I'm running 7.4. I'm not up to 8 yet. And I just have one I/O. I sold my other ones because I don't need them. And I've got a fairly decent amount of plug-ins and stock like that. So RAM, I'm like so non-technical, so I don't really know how much RAM I have, but it's plenty to do what I have to do.
Plenty. Robert?
Much like him, I don't know what I'm running. I've got a Trident console in there, but for digital, running Mac Pro, 16 gig of RAM. I don't know my processing speed. It's 8-core, whatever the new junk is. Running a 32-inch LCD screen, so I can see faders about 3 feet tall, and Waves Mercury stuff, URS stuff, all the SSL junk. I don't know. I push buttons.
Throw faders still sounds good.
Throw faders to it. I'm a knob jockey. You know how it is.
My SSL is like 256K of RAM. But it's weird because it runs 48 channels of EQ and compression. I don't know. I've got a 4 or an 8-core Mac maxed out on RAM. Pro Tools HD, Excel 7, like 192 channels of I/O on Euphonics converters, which are killer, by the way. And, you know, a bunch of plugins. The Soundtoys stuff is ridiculous, and the new UAD2 stuff is really great, too. But, you know, you have the standard Waves and the bizarre ones that you download from the internet, and they crash your computer in the middle of a mix, and, you know, all that fun stuff.
I like that they got your engineering humor.
Well, you know, 6 of them.
I run a Mac, running Pro Tools 8. I've got about 5 of the 192 IOs with another digital IO. RAM-wise, it's maxed out, but I can't give you any specific numbers. I don't normally put my computer together myself. I usually have somebody keep that kind of thing up to speed for me, and depend on them to know what the newest updates are that won't crash the computer or conflict with other plugs or cause problems along the upgrade path. But so I'm kind of lucky in that way. And I run through a DigiDesign D-Command console with some SPL summing boxes, and I guess that's it.
Do you guys all sum or use the console when you mix?
Well, I do a combination of internal in-the-box summing, but I spread it out over 48 channels of analog summing.
Yeah, same. I mean, SSL and dangerous analog summing, and then, I mean, you blend stuff in the box, obviously, strings, backgrounds, stuff like that, whatever works.
Same
Same.
thing.
I don't have my own place. I mean, I have a little office that I work in the box sometimes, but for me, every project is completely different. So.
Okay, cool. Do you guys, let's talk about a vocal chain. What do you get into on a vocal chain? Is it all plugins? Is it a combination? And it depends on the vocal, obviously, but are there just go-to things you do all the time, like stack things up and then see if you need them or not, and that kind of thing?
Well, normally on a console, I spread the vocal out on 3 faders, and I like to keep one kind of raw, as it were, and maybe put a what do you call, Tube-Tech compressor. And then the other one will have one mult will have a distressor for a real compressed, kind of a brighter sound, and the other one will have a fat cell for a warmer sound. And depending on parts of the song, you'll have a little warmer sound, a little brighter sound. So it's a combination of 3 faders, and that's kind of a standard thing for me when I'm on a console. Otherwise, and the RVox I use all the time.
RVox?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I've been trying some new stuff lately. The new CLA stuff that came out is pretty ridiculous. I mean, I'm not a preset mixer by any means, but you can pull out some of those presets and kind of play around with the parameters they've got already kind of lined out, because they've done a lot of this work for you. I mean, they got people getting paid a lot of money to go in there, and I mean, Chris Lord-Alge himself had a big part in designing his plugins, which is not that common these days. Just people brand it with their name and don't really know what they're doing. But some of the CLA vocals, the way it compresses and the EQ curves that are already kind of built into it are kind of cool. But typically, I'll run SSL channel strip on vocals almost all the time, RVOX stuff almost every session. I'm a lot like you, where I put a couple of faders. I use two to four, depending on how many different channels I need of vocals, how many different parts of the song, how thick it gets in parts. With rock music, I mean, it needs to be thick in the choruses and when people are singing hard. Like with the Scott Stapp thing, he's got a signal, he's got a voice that you know his voice on any song he's ever sang on. He's got this sound. And from working with one of his producers on the stuff that I did, it's one of his secrets, I'm sure you can hear it already, is the Eventide Ultra Harmonizer coming in stereo down under his vocals. You bring it up with a little bit of phase sound going in there. If you listen to any of Creed's records or any of the stuff that Scott Stapp did on his solo stuff, you hear that harmonizer in there. Now that if you haven't paid attention to it, listen for it. But it's a good little trick, not so prominent in the mix normally, but to bring it down under to thicken vocals if for some reason you were given a mix where they didn't double or triple vocals. It helps thicken it up in choruses, and that's a little something that I do. But SSL channel strip, yeah, RVOX, those are pretty much staples in my mixes.
My vocal chain is ridiculously complicated. I mean, it's literally half my studio. There's probably 150 grand worth of gear on the vocal by itself, because I like blending. This will probably create controversy, but I think plugins suck on vocals. I think that's one of my biggest problems with Pro Tools mixes is I hate the way vocals sound through plugins, and I don't know why. Maybe it's distortion, or maybe it's transformers, or maybe it's whatever, but I've never been able to get anything I really like on a vocal straight digital. So what I like to do is I like to take a bunch of old compressors and I blend those together. So usually I start in Pro Tools and I will do some plug-in treatment on the vocal before it goes outboard, usually, low-end roll-off with a GML EQ, maybe a de-esser, maybe a limiter, depending, and then it'll break out to the console where I'm blending two Blue Stripe 1176s, a retro stay level, a Langevin, an LA2A, an LA3A, just a bunch of old vintage compressors. Some are fast, some are slow, some are distorted, some are bright, some are dark, and I just kind of blend those together to get the basic vocal sound that I really like, and then that actually comes back into my Pro Tools rig to get committed. Because you never know. If you're using old compressors, you never know when something's going to throw a rod, so you might as well print it. When that comes back to the console, though, it's not over, because it's getting, actually, before it goes to Pro Tools, it's getting some SSL EQ and compression if it needs it to. And then once it gets back out to the console, it may get additional plug-in treatment in Pro Tools running live, where I would be doing what you guys were talking about, which is certain sections of the song maybe need to be hollowed, certain sections need a high-end boost. You can blend in something distorted to thicken it or just mess with it, and then it gets a bunch of parallel treatment, spatial stuff, Dimension D sometimes, parallel compression, all that garbage, and that's the chain. It's complicated, but it works really well.
Hey,
I feel like I'm not doing enough now. I gotta get back and treat this vocally. I'm
Maybe I'm
embarrassed.
doing too much.
with your compression,
That seems like it's going to take a whole day to get a vocal sound.
No, it's actually really fast, you basically have the 5 different flavors, and when you hear somebody's
You're
voice,
set
you're
up
like,
like that,
okay,
yeah.
it's going to be
That's cool.
it's going to be Darth or Obi-Wan, dark or light, and you can kind of mess with it right there.
man, I'm gonna go sit out there for a second because I gotta ask you a question.
All right.
When you're doing these compression, like so many compressors in line, and I do this too with plugins.
Not
mostly.
line, they're all parallel.
Oh, right on. I was going to ask, how are you? Well, if he was doing them in line, I was going to ask, how much is he hitting each one?
No, it's
Compression-wise,
all
that's a-
parallel, and most of them, they're not being hit very much, except when you want that
Yeah.
effect and you slam an 1176
Sure.
and you get that thing.
Yeah, that's what, I mean, I was going to say that, I guess I forgot. I'll sometimes run a few different plugins, compression plugins in a row, or I'll kick it back out to 1176 or something in my rack, or whatever I've got, where I'm working. But I'll hit them all, sometimes with an EQ in between each, depending on how each one's affecting it, on top end or low end or whatever. Just a few dB of compression, just to kind of level out the vocals without totally slamming it, unless it's for
Yeah.
the effect, like you're saying.
But it's really cool to be able to pre-treat something, send it out to a vintage compressor, get that character, bring it back in the box, and then fix some of the problems with it, add the air afterwards, carve out stuff, get rid of low-end rumble, add some Phoenix, like Crane song to it, or, you can use different plugins to bring out character that you get from going through the vintage compressors that I can't find in plugins. I mean, plugins do EQ and they try and emulate distortion, but the really complex stuff that you get by running it through an old 1176, I just can't find it in a plugin, so I use that, and then I use the other plugins around it.
Yeah, I love Reed's records. In fact, I was telling him something that I dug that I just heard recently, but my approach is much different than Reed's. Mine is kind of more of an old school, less is more type of thing, very simple with a little bit of analog stuff on the front end going in, while the singer is doing the performance, just a little compression and EQ. After that, it's almost exclusively a plug as needed, but I never get too into it. I tend to find that in my own experience, when I get stuff, if I'm called upon to remix something that someone else has done, and I see a lot of plugs on it. Of course, it's all in the way you use the plugs. But I tend to find that as soon as I strip everything away, instantly the artist is happier with the sound. So I tend to take that approach more often. I guess the things that I generally have available to me almost all the time are a little bit of a de-esser, a Fairchild limiter, and I forget what it's called, a G channel EQ. And that's pretty much it for me. Very simple.
But you record most of the stuff that you're working
That's
on,
right.
right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah, and that
absolutely
makes
right.
a huge difference, too, because you can get it the way you want it when you record it. as
Well,
opposed
that's
to-
true. I mean, Reed's right. I think you do mostly
All-
mixing.
yeah.
And so it's very different from me. As I begin a project from beginning to end, I'm kind of mixing along the way and getting the character of the vocal the way I want it in the very beginning. And part of that is working with the singer to get the sound that you really want. I think a lot of that you have to manufacture
Yeah,
yourself.
well, and I mean, honestly, everybody says this, it's almost a cliche. It's so totally true. A great singer makes all the difference. There's a handful of people who are great singers, and I mean, when you hear them, you know who they are, and it's awesome when you mix, like Tate, you pull his voice up, and it's killer.
You're right.
And it's just, there's a quality to it that you can't EQ that quality into it, you can't excite that quality into it. It's just a great singer, and that's a special treat, and
Yep.
consequently, hopefully, you have to do a heck of a lot less.
Right, right.
Do you use exciters? Like in your
I
mixes?
am an exciter.
Glorious.
I guess so. I'm thinking about that. I mean, I'll use distortion as an exciter. I will occasionally use an old Aphex Type 2. I will occasionally use Dolby Type A.
Right on.
Actually, I use Dolby Type A quite a bit. So yes,
Cool.
I guess that counts as an exciter, right?
Yeah, I was curious at what you use. I fake mine, I think. Multi-track and compress, or EQ, roll off all the low end and all the mid-lows and everything up to 5K, 10, I don't know, somewhere way up there, whatever sounds good. And then compress the crap out of it and bring it up under my mix just to,
Actually, that's a really good technique. I had somebody send me a vocal that was so distorted, there was no opportunity to recut it. It was screwed. So I was fighting with it for like an hour, and finally I just cheated, and I called Michael Brower, and I was like, dude, what do you do to fix this thing? And he's like, well, here's what I usually do, exactly what you said. Take a copy of the vocal, roll everything off except the very extreme top end, put it through an 1176 and obliterate it. Flip the phase and bring it in under the other vocal. And it's really kind of strange because what'll happen is it'll do something weird to the top end, like that helps temper it and helps let you concentrate on the frequencies that you want to and kind of downplays the bad stuff. I don't know how it does it, but it seems to work. And it actually does seem to work in the box too. You just you have to limit it. I mean, you're crushing it, like just obliterate
It's got to
it.
be a flat line.
Yeah.
But don't bring it up too loud, because, I mean, it's tempting when you find a new trick or something, and you guys all know this.
Yeah, you abuse
You're
it.
like, yes, bring up this. It sounds exciting now. And then you bring it up to a point. You just got to bring it up to a point to where you mute it, you miss it, and that's where
Right.
that's where I kind
You
of found
discover
that
it the
spot.
next day that you've gone too far.
Well, you discover it when you send that mix out, and then you come in the next day and it's too
Yeah.
far, and you fix it, and then the artist is like, man, my vocal was so exciting. And you're just like, oh, I just screwed myself.
Yep. Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's a good trick.
Yeah, I was just curious to what you used in case there's something I could save time and not do that.
Now, Reed, when you were talking about the Dolby A, you were talking about a hardware piece, right?
Yeah.
The old encoding it and just using the encoded sound, is that
Yeah.
right? Okay.
I imagine you can get that for pretty cheap now. Some old
Oh
Dolby.
yeah, these things are next to nothing on the inner tubes. You can get an old Dolby, I think it's a 365 or a Cat 23. I mean, it's the old Dolby A card. And you can run it unmodified, or there's a resistor mod you can do by clipping something. But when you run a vocal through it, it's encoding it for Dolby, which was designed to go onto tape and then be decoded. So what it does is it does a weird compression thing, and it cranks these harmonics, like the high-end harmonics. When you blend that in under a regular vocal, it puts a sparkle on it that's really interesting. The problem is, with all things digital, if you're not perfectly in time, you're getting phasing, and it's a problem. And unfortunately, with most of these workstations, especially Pro Tools, nothing is perfectly in time. Delay compensation is never perfectly in time, and it changes. So if you're doing this all in the box and you're doing the analog thing, you either have to sum it analog, or you have to, what I used to do was print it with a sync pop and then line it up with my vocal and then just run it underneath, and then I knew it was always in time.
Does delay compensation work outside the box with your Euphonics converters?
Yes, sort of. I
Yeah.
mean, it works to the point where Digidesign delay compensation is actually functional, which is not 100%.
Yeah, because I run Apogee Rosettas, and when you go outside the box, you got to fix it.
Yeah.
You got to go into hardware.
Yeah, you
delays.
do. I mean, it took a lot of setup and everything, but the hassle is worth it. The thing that bums me out is when delay compensation randomly changes during the course of a mix because you add another bus or you add an extra track, or, that kind of sucks.
How about on transient things like drums and percussion, stuff like that? Plug-in wise, are there any compressors you love to use on that, either analog or digital, and how do you treat it?
Man, I'm running sorry, man.
Go ahead.
I'm running SSL channel strip plug-in on everything. G, I think. Man, I don't know. I push buttons. Yeah, the Waves SSL bundle thing. I pull up the G channel. I'm pretty sure. There's tons of plugins or presets you can download, and a lot of them are pretty good. A lot of them are crap. Just keep an eye. If it works for you, it works. But tweak stuff. I use those on a lot of stuff. I've been getting into the TransX plugin. It acts kind of like a transient designer. I mean, that's pretty much what it does. But you can add more attack, decay to your kick and snare, which is crazy. It sounds good. I malt my drums, run it through. I'll either kick it back out to my stereo 76s, 1176, or hit it with something in the box that sounds kind of close to it. I also do a lot of really hard, slam the drums type thing. I won't usually sit in my rooms, or sometimes not even my second set of overheads. It depends on if I'm tracking or not. To that bus or to that parallel compression, because it gets kind of washy and hissy, and I don't want to mess with it. But I also subgroup my kick, snare, and toms into their own subgroup as well, and parallel compress that and bring it up for hard rock, for rock stuff. My toms, I've been doing a weird thing where I'm going to say the T word, trigger. I'll trigger my toms. I'll leave the regular ones in there if they sound good. I'll trigger them and send them to their own channel, and put reverb actually as an insert on those triggers, and so it's a really pure reverb, reverberated sound, and I'll compress that and EQ it, get the mud out of that, and bring it up under the mix. It just makes your toms ring a little cleaner in your mix, and that's just a little trick I've been doing, especially for the country stuff. It kind of sounds good if it's not a dry sound you're going for. Some of the melodic singer-songwriter stuff just gives you a really tonal tom sound. You keep the attack and the crisp, clean stick hit, but you just have a boom type sound, because your reverb's pure from a trigger, from a sample, from a whatever.
Yeah, I recorded Chris McHugh some years ago and got some really amazing tom sounds, so those end up on a fair amount of records.
Yeah.
What do you use to trigger?
I'm going to tell him. I'm going to tell
Do
him.
it.
Oh.
Do it. I send him like 5 cents every time I use them.
Yes, sir. I use, I've got a million different things. I'm getting into this Steven Slate stuff I love for sounds, for trigger sounds. Are you asking for what I use to replace, or what I use
Yeah.
to? I don't use
No, the actual plugin that you're using to trigger, not the sounds.
Drumagog. I've used that for years. I've done Sound Replacer, and it's just not the accuracy I need for it. Drumagog, I mean, there's not any that I'm really happy with. I end up going and fixing them all manually anyway, every single hit, tab to transient, whatever. That's the story of my life. I need an intern. Anybody?
No, because you'll end up redoing it.
I know. It's mostly. I know, dude. I see that ad in Mix every magazine. I can't wait.
I mean, it's whatever works. The new SPL trigger plugin is pretty cool. I've been using that a lot.
I
It's
got
really
it.
good.
I haven't messed with it.
App Trigger costs like $20, and it triggers super accurately.
Does it?
Yep.
How's it velocity wise?
Fine. I mean, it'll track, blah blah blah. It's
What's the new Easy Drummer? Is it Drum Tracker, Easy Tracker? Anybody know what that is?
So this conversation right here is actually part of the problem, because we don't need 20 trigger plugins, and neither do you. Like, we don't need 50 EQ plugins, especially because most of them are exactly the same.
Every one of them's the same.
Yeah, the parametric digital EQ, by and large, is exactly the same. The curves, you can match them and null them. They're exactly the same. If they have some sort of distortion in them or some sort of character thing after or before the EQ, it might change the sound. But other than that, a curve is a curve. It's just digital parametric EQ. It blows my mind how many options there are, and I start to wonder why some of the stuff that I get is so crappy, and I think it's because everyone's worrying about their options and not actually worrying about the sound. When people used to work on consoles, I mean, you had a compressor, you had an EQ, it worked for 90% of the stuff, and when you needed it for the other 10, you would go to your GML, or you would go to your Pultec, or you would go to your character. Now we spend so much time digging through all these different things. We're not spending enough time listening to the music. We're spending too much time playing. with the
I'm
options.
going to make a statement. I hope you don't hate me for this, but I think we need better recorded stuff to mix.
That would be so nice.
Because I think the art of engineering has slipped tremendously over the years because of all the freaking options we have. And I'm sitting here listening to you guys, and I know you're great engineers, but I'm embarrassed to say that I hardly do anything to my drums, at least when I record them, because I get them
But
live.
you're recording them.
Well, that's the
Huge
problem
difference.
with what the industry, I don't want to get on a high horse or anything like that, but some of the stuff we have to mix, that I have to mix, I can't believe that people sit through weeks and months listening to the crap, and they hand it off to you, and they go, we don't like the mix, and I'm like, well, I don't like the shit that you give me to mix. It's like, put some effort into the recording process. The thing is that Pro Tools is supposed to be a tool. And like when I get the stuff to mix, I hardly use any plugins. And I think it should sound natural and it shouldn't sound so processed. And I think that's what we're hearing on the radio, is that everything is processed to hell in every genre. And I'm old school, and I enjoy just bringing up this. What's the song? Is the song cool? You know what I mean? It's like to go through all that hassle to make something sound good. I don't have the patience at my age for that stuff.
I would love to get better sounding stuff. I don't ever get to record stuff that very, very rarely.
I love tracking. I love tracking as much as mixing. And to get record Chris McHugh or Greg Morrow or Chad Cromwell and get a great drum sound, you're done. A little side parallel compression when you're mixing, and Bob's your uncle.
I got to go cut a record down in Texas last year, and it was a record that I was going to mix. And one of the songs that ended up being on the record, the drum sound on the song was a mic. It was a 47 through an 1176, and a good drummer, and he was playing everything live, and it sounded great. And everyone was like, "Man, that sounds great. How'd you do that?" I was like, "Good drummer, one mic," you know. But a lot of the stuff that I get is obliterated. I get stuff, in fact, I'm going out of here today, going back to the studio to recall a mix to send to Ted Jensen that I am 99% sure the distortion they're hearing is in the tracks that I got. And they didn't hear it because they didn't hear it. I don't know. Their monitoring's bad. They weren't paying attention. The intern bounced it wrong. I don't know. But when you mix it and you push it up right here, you hear all this distortion. And I'm 99% sure that's where that distortion's coming from, and there's nothing I can do about it. But I get that all the time. I get distorted vocals all the time. And I think it's not because, honestly, I think it's because people are in their bedroom on speakers and they can't hear it until it's too late.
Yeah.
You know.
Or it's the 6-word, the dreaded 6 words, they'll fix it in the mix.
Yeah.
Producers
we're having
they
Reed
don't,
mix it, he'll get it right.
They don't
You
give it
can't
up.
fix distortion. You can't unscramble an omelet. You know, that's one of the things that no one's created a plugin that fixes distortion.
Is it digital? Are they hitting the converter too hard, or is it just from the gear before it hits Pro?
Well, honestly, I just had a conversation with Brown about this because he brought me some vocals that were glorious. And he said, well, what do you think the difference is? And I was like, well, it's like if you take a picture of a beautiful building or landscape or whatever with a really high-res camera, and then you take a picture with your iPhone, when you look at them both on your iPhone, they look great. When you blow it up to wall size, the iPhone picture looks crappy. And the high-res picture looks great. And that's what's happening when we mix it. When you take that vocal and you put it right here and you concentrate on it, you get to find all the problems. And sometimes it's the singer's blowing the mic out. Sometimes it's the mic pre's a little too loud and it's clipping a little bit. Usually, I think what it is a combination of factors. It's the pre's a little hot, it's hitting the compressor, it's hitting that transformer a little bit. It might be clipping on the third chorus and the bridge and all of that kind of combines together, and you get something that just doesn't have the resolution.
Because, too, the old days, I hate to say this, but, you have to look at the meter, make sure the vocal wasn't too hot, and make sure that the compressor wasn't. But nowadays, it's like everybody wants that level right up before it hits red. And that's bullshit. You don't need to put that much level into a digital thing, you know what I mean? It's not the whole thing about more level is good, It's like, especially if you're mixing on a console, and there's like this much level on there, you bring your fader up that much and it's too hot, and so it's...
Now that we're complaining, can I just add one other thing? I've actually noticed this. We've had aha moments with this in the past. A lot of guys, when they're working, they want it to be exciting. So what do? You grab a multi-band compressor and you throw it on the mix bus. And it makes stuff sound really exciting. But what I'm discovering is a lot of these younger producers are making recording decisions and making EQ decisions through this multi-band compressor. Then they take the multi-band compressor off and send me the flat files. And then they wonder why stuff sounds different. Because on a rough mix, as you know, there's always going to be one element that's totally killer because that chain happened to catch the bass right. But it didn't catch anything else right. So they want you to fix everything else but leave the bass exactly the same, except the bass they're listening to isn't what's actually recorded. It's what's actually recorded after they have 3 plugins on it and they're feeding it through a multi-band compressor that's getting 70 other tracks. So it's something that you can't replicate.
Well, don't forget, the guy who prepared the files for you to mix is probably the guy who really wanted to be mixing it.
Well,
So they
sometimes.
stripped that away, right?
I mean, but when you get good stuff from people, like I love getting a rough mix when I push it up and I'm like, holy shit, this sounds good. How am I going to beat this? Those are the best because you know that there's good stuff there. It's when you push it up and it's like, oh man, this is going to take me an hour to better it.
I've been in tracking situations with a full room full of musicians, and you get a rough mix done in a place where, the level is right up here, and the instant reaction from everybody is, oh, turn it down. It's like, you don't want, if someone has a mix that I did, they're going to want to hopefully say turn it up. But when you hear people say turn it down, that's not good. So more is not necessarily better. It doesn't have to be loud and bright and compressed all the time.
But I mean, but a lot of times it is. I have gotten over and over again rough mixes that are 6 dB louder than Ted Jensen can make the master.
Right.
Okay? That's loud. It's physically possible. It is impossible to explain to an artist or an A&R guy or a drummer or whatever when you take a mix and you take that super limited rough mix and this one is 6 dB louder or 3 dB louder or 1 dB louder, and when you compare them, this one will always win.
Right.
Even if it's distorted, even if it's crap, it will always win because the human
And then when you
hearing
bring that
goes for the
level
louder
down,
one.
you realize that that mix does nothing.
Right.
It just sits there. There's no dynamics at all.
Right. But, I mean, if your rough mixes are louder than Ted Jensen can make a master, you're doing something wrong. And just because now that we have the tools to do that, we're screwing ourselves because it's possible, but it's not smart.
What plugin are we talking about?
Pick one.
We got a couple of Twitter questions actually that came in. One is for Reed, but anybody can answer this. When you're doing the complex vocal setups you're doing, are you soloing it or are you listening in the track and then adjusting as you go?
I'm always listening in the track. I mean, unless it's a solo vocal, I don't see any reason to solo anything. But when I'll pull a track up and I'll listen to it and I'll get the vibe and then I'll listen to the vocal and I'll see how it fits and I'll either duck stuff down or maybe I'll solo the vocal and try a few things and then put it back in and see how it fits. What I try and do is I try and catch the vibe of the track, put the vocal where I think that vibe is, and then I shut the vocal off and I'll work for 10 minutes and turn the vocal back on and see how it's fitting with everything else. Because, you can, if you mix without the vocal, you can end up filling the space where the vocal goes, and then you try and cram it in there, and then you've got all kinds of problems.
I start my mixes with my vocals.
Yeah, I do
I
too.
bring them up to
First thing you do is the vocal.
Yeah, I even work on delays with, time-based delays and stuff and try to get things sounding good, like make it.
See, I do that last.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Well, I'll bring them up. I mean, I'll automate crap and stuff once the track's there, but I'll get stuff I have staple delays, like I always throw a tight slap on there and bring it up if I need it. I have my quarter note delays. I've got my throw delays on certain words that are automated in there for,
Yeah.
standard mix stuff. I say standard, I don't know.
It's standard stuff.
Yeah, and we've got the plates and the verbs, the halls, whatever I've got, all coming back in stereo and bring them up a little bit just so I know they're all there and they're all in time with the click and all that stuff. And then I'll work my mix around that. I said that to see what you would say.
That's interesting. I never do. I go for a vocal sound that I feel fits the record, and if it strikes me like let's do a slap, I'll put a slap on it. Let's do a long delay, I'll put a long delay on it. If I don't know where the track's going to go as far as that vibe yet, I'll just get the vocal sounding good and fix problems and then move on.
Actually, I wanted to add something. A big part of my vocal sound, too, is delay. I usually almost always use delay. I hate, long reverbs.
Yeah.
And a thing I've been doing lately is I've been duplicating my vocal file, and I put Echo Boy. I use that exclusively because it's like the best sounding delay. I like
world.
it better
It
than
is,
most
yeah.
analog delays.
Yeah,
And
it's Echo Boy is by far the best sounding.
And then also,
plugin I've
from
ever
Sound
I agree.
Toys, I also use Decapitator, and that's pretty cool on vocals as well, and bass guitars. But when I use the Echo Boy on the vocal, it's great because you can tailor that file to the delay as opposed to sending it, so you can go in there and do that. So.
Nice. We have a question over here.
First of all, I agree on the Echo Boy. It is the best on vocals. I kind of have a two-part question. One's regarding a compressor on the two-bus, if you use them, if you start with one and then mix, or if you mix, then stick one on, and if you had favorites, what they might be. And I know that's a question everybody kind of looks up at. Also, as far as layering, depth, do you set like a long verb, short verb, medium verb, or delay, and just kind of use those with your tracks? So just had a question on how you guys layer. Where do you get your depth in your mix?
Well, I guess I'll start. The compression issue on the two-bus, I use, on the output analog, I use an SSLG series compressor on the output of the two-bus, and I also use a little bit of a multi-band compressor, which is a plug-in on the two-bus.
Which one?
The TC Master X. I don't do a lot of it, but it is helpful, and it does add a nice excitement to things. I think the trick with anything is not to overdo it, and I think a lot of people have well, they're tempted to overdo things. But that's it for the two-bus. Echo-wise, I think a lot of the depth, at least for me, I get not so much in the layers of reverbs. I don't use a ton of reverbs, maybe one or two, and a couple delays. I don't use a lot of that stuff. I think most of the layering really comes from the summing that I'm doing outside of that. The analog summing, I think, really helps to create those layers.
I mean, I lucked out and I got an SSL with a really killer mix compressor in it, and those who have used SSLs know what I mean. But when I say I lucked out, some of them everything sounds different. All analog stuff sounds different. This one sounds great. A fair amount of the mix stuff goes through the two-bus compressor on the SSL. Some of it doesn't. Sometimes vocals go through. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes sample stuff or programming goes through. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I'll route it around it and go through a dangerous. I mean, it just kind of depends on what kind of song you're doing and how you want to treat it. As far as depth, I have yet to find a plug-in reverb that works. For some reason, plug-in reverbs are a thing where you put it on something and it either disappears or it clouds, but it never makes that magic open. I haven't found anything that does that magic open thing. The UAD stuff is the stuff that comes the closest, but for dense music, I'm still having the best luck with EMT and 480L and stuff like that.
I run like you. I hit the two-bus with a G-Series compressor a little bit. I leave a lot of stuff up to the mastering guy, depending on who's mastering it and if I like him or not, or if I have a reputation with him or whatever, and I know what he likes to get for stems and stuff like that. I don't know. But I'll throw it up there in different parts of the song. I rarely ever, I probably would say never throw it up at the beginning of a mix, personally. I know a lot of people do. That's just not my gig.
I do.
I throw it up. I'll get levels kind of where I like it and throw it up somewhere, usually 2/3 of the way through a mix, see how it changes things or if it changes things, or sometimes it gives me ideas, depending on if compression hits an instrument a certain way or a vocal a certain way. And I'll take it back off and maybe adjust that or address that particular instrument or subgroup or vocal or whatever to hit it with a little more compression if I like the way it hit it, or take it off if I wanted to hit the two-bus compressor harder. I'll back off some of the compression on the vocals. I don't let that influence my mix too much, though. I like my mix being tight and solid and full before it hits compression on the two-bus, which tomato, whatever. For thickness in my mixes, I always, like I said, I always set up my delays and my plate and my hall, so they're there. I can have them if I need them. If I don't, I'll deactivate them and get rid of them or whatever. Which, by the way, is a good trick. You need to deactivate your plugins. Don't just bypass them because they're still eating your resources, if you didn't know that. So kill them. I'll kill them and hide them, whatever. But on ballads and stuff, I use Altiverb. It's the best one I've got in the box. Mm-hmm. And I EQ the crap out of it post insert. So get rid of the mud and let the vocals sit on their own. But I get most of my space probably from, I do use delays. I use my quarter delays, my eighth delays, dotted eighths delays, whatever. Not all of them at the same time necessarily, and not all of them at full blast, but in the mix a little bit to where you miss them if they're gone, but it kind of creates a little space in big parts of the song and stuff like that.
It's funny, this gets back to what we were talking about earlier about having too many options. Back in the day, which is to say when people were making a lot of records that a lot of us look at and go, man, those records were amazing, they didn't have 400 delay options. They didn't have 30 reverb options. They had 2. They had a long reverb and a short reverb. They had a delay or maybe 2 delays.
No stereo compressors.
Right.
Back in the day.
Right.
On a two-bus.
So, I mean, and even when you move up into the 80s and 90s and some of that stuff, it was pretty much you've got your long delay and your short delay and maybe a slap. You've got a long reverb and a short reverb. And there's a reason why that seems to work better with everything kind of feeding into these limited options than here's an acoustic, you have a reverb plug-in on that, you put that on through this reverb, this through that reverb, this through that reverb, and then all of a sudden you've got all this stuff fighting for space, and you can't, I mean, there's just not enough space there.
But that's a good point, and I'm glad you brought that up, because with my acoustic and my vocals, and, you know, if I have a piano in the track, or I don't know what I'm mixing right now, apparently an orchestra, but depending on whatever is in the track, I'll send a lot of that stuff to the same verb. And of course I'll favor the vocals because that's what everybody needs to hear. But I'll EQ the verb to make sure it's not mudding up the vocal, mudding? Where am I from? Nashville. Mudding up the vocals. And I'll send a lot of stuff to that same plate or that same verb, with the exception of snare or toms or something like that. But I don't have a million different reverbs up. Just a little thing.
Okay. Question?
Don't bother, just
Yeah,
trigger.
no.
They all do.
Everybody
Like all of
triggers.
your favorite records in that genre, they're triggering. When they say in an interview they never trigger, they're lying.
Yeah, they're all sampled.
Yeah.
You know, and you can't, I mean, unless you have the best drummer in the world, which you don't, you know. He's resting his foot on the beater when he puts his foot down, and it's moving back and forth, and it's creating air. There's leakage in the room. Like, I guarantee you, especially for that genre, everything is triggered. Even now, if you want to get all purist, which is fine, find the killer kick drum on that song, sample that, and trigger that, you know. Trigger that through.
I don't even, as far as triggering, I mean, besides a Massey triggering device, I haven't really, the triggering plugins, haven't had a lot of luck with. I just tab a transient and go through and do it that way. And it's a little time consuming, but to me, it's a little bit tighter that way.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, we used to print stuff, and the thing that I've always, and again, back to this kind of music, there's a kick drum and a trigger, or two triggers, or three triggers, and whatever. The transient is one thing. The phase relationship between the actual kick drum and the sample is another. And if you sit there and mess with it by slipping it, and mess with the in and out of polarity, you will hear a radical change in your low end.
That's something that's kind of thrown by the wayside too, is phase. I think people need to pay more attention to phase.
I mean, I can't believe that
Some things
Pro
don't
Tools
have
doesn't
phase
have
buttons.
a polarity button
Yeah.
built into the
Right.
software. But you know, when I got the SPL trigger plugin, it has delay as a knob and polarity right there. So you can sit there and run the kick drums together and mess with the timing of the sample and mess with the polarity until you feel that just get solid. Like that makes a huge difference in triggers.
Keep it manual. Well, think about how someone would play it. If they're doing a double kick, their left foot might not be as strong as their right, and most likely probably isn't. I mean, even the best drummers, they're pretty good at it, but their left is just a little weak. So it's not going da-da-da-da-da-da, it's going da-da-da-da-da-da. I mean, not that exaggerated, but I mean, if you're going in there manually and adjusting your triggers or you're timing things up and all your duplicate triggers on your random tracks, whatever, do them all manually. It's going to take painless
Forever.
time. It sucks, but we all do it. And
Once again, whatever you hear is not believable as far as I'm concerned, music-wise. You know,
Well-
when you hear the radio, there's nothing that I believe was played by that person and performed.
Well, and let's be honest, with certain genres of music, believable sucks. Like sometimes when you listen to a, I don't know, Filter record, and you know, they get that, you know, they got that killer just wall of, that's not believable, and it not being believable is what makes it rock so hard, because everything is, it's grid rock, everything is locked, everything hits on the same beat, and when that, you know, when that one hits, like, it shakes the room because it's not believable, you know? So
You know,
it's
and
all
that
dependent on that.
brings up another point, is that, you know, I know myself, I can speak for myself, and probably these guys sitting here, and hopefully every one of you too, is that I think mixing and engineering, passion is involved and soul is involved. You know, it's not a matter of, you know, it's all this, like, I didn't know the RAM. I'm into like the music aspect and the earthiness of it. A few weeks ago, I was driving in a car with my wife, and we heard Honky Tonk Woman. And when that song comes on, I'm getting chills right now imagining that song on the radio. And it's just one guitar and a drum in the verses. And it sounds great on the radio. That was 40 friggin' years ago. You know, play me something now that sounds that good. I'm not sure. I haven't heard anything. And I know it's a different vibe than a metal thing, but, you know, it's like believability. I don't think we have to believe in the music we hear anymore. It's all, you know, it's all crap.
Man, I was going to tell you. I agree, dude.
Sorry, I'm showing my age.
It's all bright, compressed crap. I do a lot of hard rock stuff. Manually automate your volume on your kicks. If you've got a double kick solo or something that's all of a sudden, just bring every other one down a little bit, and don't make it everyone's here. Because no one's that consistent. Make one here,
Yeah.
whatever. And automate your EQ. Find any random EQ, because they're all the same, and throw it on the kick drum. I literally have 4 drum samples going in for my kick drum and most of my hard rock metal stuff, all stacked, and I automate them in and out depending on what part of the song it is. And if you don't have the time or patience or the resources to do that many different samples on your one track, automate the EQ. So when the kick's standing alone, bring in a little more of those lows or something, so it's not, because it doesn't have to conflict with anything.
Yeah.
And then you know, quick shortcut, real quick. We're talking about plugins. What is it? Control. What are the bottom 3? Apple,
Bottom
Control.
3.
The bottom 3 left of the keyboard on a Mac. Control, Option, and Command. Click any parameter in any plugin, by the way. And it'll automatically send it to your automation, your automation list, so you can automate it in your track. So instead of going up there and clicking your automation
Auto and
sub-menu
picking, yeah,
and
you
finding,
just-
which frequency is that? There's a million, some of them you scroll down, like, I have no idea which one of these I wanted to adjust. You just 3-button click any parameter in there, and it automatically goes into your automation list, which is a nice little hint to,
Cool, man, thanks.
I don't know what it is on Windows.
Where's that
Sorry.
in the manual?
Dude, what's a manual?
I don't know the keystrokes. I can sit down and do it, but I can't explain how.
I know, that's
It's
why I was
just,
like,
it's muscle memory.
It's this button, right here.
Yeah, call that the 3-finger salute, is what I call it.
Yes, sir.
Just don't worry about the names, just 3 fingers, bam.
That's
And when
it.
it doesn't work, then it's the one-fingered salute.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man.
There's a great quick key book, by the way, by Chilito Valenzuela called Pro Tools Shortcuts. It's on Amazon. If you search that, it's about that thick.
I should read that.
He's a really cool guy, and it's got all the Pro Tools shortcut keys documented, and it's a very good book to have. We got time for one more question. Go ahead.
Hi there. I wanted to find out, when you're mixing, it seems like every song is trying to compete with each other to be loudest. And how loud should you really be mixing when you're doing your final mastering? How loud should it really be?
That loud?
No.
You know what? The Volume Wars, I was up in New York with Jensen a couple months ago, and I was talking about the Volume Wars, and he's like, dude, the Volume Wars have existed since jukeboxes. Everybody wanted their song to be louder than the other guys on the jukebox. Now we just have the technology to push it and push it and push it, but it's always been around. Don't distort it. I don't, people are like, leave room for the mastering engineer. Screw that, man. I don't leave any room for the mastering engineer. Like, they know what they're doing. They have their techniques. Like, I want it to sound the way I want it to sound. And then I want to give it to a Calby or a Jensen or a, Andrew or Scheich or whatever, and have them go one step better. Like, I want it to come back even better. But that's probably like a 3-hour conversation, because it depends on how you're doing it.
Yeah.
If you put it
Yeah.
through a limiter to
Yeah.
get the level, you're screwing your mastering engineer, because you're erasing transients.
Yeah.
That's
So
it's-
leave it as uncompressed as possible.
Just make it sound good.
Yeah.
Make it sound good.
But Reed brings up something that we're all kind of faced with too, and that is when you hand off your mix to your artist and producer, and they compare it to another CD they have in their car, You don't want it lower in level.
No.
Otherwise, they're going to be doubting what you've just done.
Sure.
I always give a copy with a little bit of schmozz on there.
Yeah.
This way.
You just spank it and send it out. You know what plugin works amazing for that? is
L1.
Massey.
The L7,
Yeah,
rather,
the
yes.
The Massey's
Yes.
mastering. Actually,
It's so
Massey's
clean.
plugins
Yes.
are ridiculous. They
Yeah.
sound amazing and they cost next to
And
nothing.
you,
He's
well, you
sick.
can get them all for free. You can get all Massey's plugins for free.
Oh,
Demo
right.
them.
If you don't want to save your
Eternally.
presets,
He'll
they're
mix
all
for free, too. Just. Oh, okay.
No, yeah,
But the Massey limiter is, I mean, you just tap it a little bit and it gives it a nice little bit of level, and I don't know what it does, but it sounds good. And then they get, I was actually just having a conversation with two producers. One of them said, I don't want you to do that because I can see through it. The other one said, I kind of want to hear what it's like mastered. So he gets limited stuff and this guy doesn't.
All right, thank you so much.
Hey,
Appreciate it.
sorry, I was talking. Do you use Pro Tools?
No, I use Nuendo.
That's your problem.
That's my problem.
It doesn't sound as
That's
good.
why it doesn't sound like everybody else's. Just kidding. No, I was going to say, Pro Tools users, you've got a gain plugin in, the audio suite, whatever, drop-down window, somewhere in there's gain. There's a function you can actually find the RMS of your mixes. Just go listen to the song, import audio and listen, like not an MP3. Go import your freaking wave off a CD and see what the RMS of the track is. And, I mean, of the genre of music you're using, if they have a reference track. That just helps me a little bit. So that way I'm like, I don't know, you don't have to look at waveforms, you don't have to do whatever.
Yeah.
And then you can, don't normalize or mix, please, but work to get to that level.
Cool.
And then once you bounce down your track, do the same for that and see how it compares. And
Excellent.
just listen. Use these things. They're cool. Yeah.
Use this, too.
Yeah.
But
Thanks so
hey,
much.
There's no shame in saying to a client, what are you referencing? And taking that and lining up with your mix and sitting there and A-Bing back and forth, because you're getting a direct idea of exactly what they're hearing, and then you can tell whether you're way off or whether you're close or whether you need to do a little or a lot. Like, that's a great tool, because I guarantee you they're doing that.
I do that.
Yeah, I do too.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I can always tell when I've been on a great panel when it seems like 10 minutes and it's over. I want to thank these guys for coming here today. Fantastic amount of information. Great amount of info. Don't forget, we have sponsors all around. We were talking about that decapitator plugin. It's actually in room C down there. Be sure to check out the Meyer live sound rig down there. It's very, very cool in the room.